My name is Hannah, and I'm 27 years old. The memory of that summer barbecue is etched into me like a scar I can't forget. It was supposed to be just another family gathering, the kind we'd had 100 times before. The grill was smoking, kids were running barefoot through the yard, and the air was thick with the smell of charred meat and the sweetness of barbecue sauce. I remember standing in line by the picnic table, balancing a paper plate in my hands, waiting my turn while my uncle pulled racks of pork ribs off the grill. The laughter around me was loud and careless, and for a brief moment I felt at ease, part of the warmth of it all. But then my sister's voice cut through the noise, sharp enough to still everything inside me. She smirked in my direction, her tone sweet and cruel at the same time, and said, "Maybe you should take it easy on the pork ribs, fatty." Before I continue, please subscribe to Show Karma, you're on the right side. Anyways, the words hit harder than any slap. There was a pause, just long enough for everyone to process what she'd said. And then the laughter came, not just hers, but from cousins, from an uncle, even from my parents. It rolled over me in waves, loud and merciless, and I stood frozen with my plate in my hands, the heat of humiliation burning in my face. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. I wanted to scream, to throw the plate down, to make them all see how much it hurt. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at the ribs on the table, feeling the laughter ripple around me like a cruel spotlight I couldn't escape. My sister leaned back in her chair, grinning like she'd just told the best joke of the day, soaking in the approval she always seemed to get at my expense. Inside, though, it wasn't just that one comment. It was every comment that had ever been made about me. Every time someone had hinted I should lose a little weight. Every time my sister had poked fun at how serious I was, how boring. Every time I had been the target of a laugh and told not to take it so personally. Her words carried the weight of years of being underestimated, dismissed, and made small. As I sat down with my plate, pretending to laugh along, my heart was racing. I could barely taste the food. All I could hear was her voice echoing in my head, the word fatty searing itself into me like it was my name. Around me, the laughter faded into other conversations, and the moment passed for everyone else. But for me, it didn't pass. It stuck. It lodged itself so deep I knew it would never leave. That barbecue, that one cruel joke, was the breaking point. They thought it was harmless. They thought it was funny. But for me, it was the moment I realized I couldn't keep living as their punchline. Something inside me shifted that day, something I couldn't yet name. But I knew I would never forget the sting of that humiliation, or the resolve it would awaken in me. Growing up with my sister meant living under the constant shadow of her smirk. It wasn't just a facial expression, it was a weapon, a reminder that in her eyes, I would always be the one to laugh at, not with. I can remember moments as far back as elementary school where that smirk appeared, just before she delivered a jab that left me red-faced and small. At family events, she'd point out how I was always eating, while she picked at her plate like she was too delicate for the same food. Everyone would chuckle, brushing it off as harmless sibling teasing, while I sank deeper into myself. The pattern never changed. If I wore something new, she'd tilt her head and say, "That's brave," in a tone that sounded more like mockery than compliment. If I answered a question too seriously at dinner, she'd roll her eyes and announce to the room, "Here comes Hannah with another lecture." And if I ever dared to speak up about how much it hurt, my parents would sigh and tell me not to be so sensitive, reminding me that it's just how she is. As if cruelty was simply her personality, and my silence was the price I had to pay for keeping the peace. School made it worse. She was the one with the easy charm, the kind of charisma that drew people in, no matter how shallow it really was. I was quieter, more studious, more focused on getting things right than on being entertaining. But instead of being celebrated for that, I was constantly compared to her. Teachers would say, "Why can't you be more outgoing like your sister?" Or relatives would whisper at gatherings, "She's the fun one, Hannah's the serious one." I began to feel like my entire identity had been written for me, the dull, overlooked sibling who existed only to make her sparkle brighter. The digs grew sharper as we got older. In high school, when I was self-conscious about my body, she picked up on it immediately and weaponized it. She'd pat my arm and say things like, "Don't worry, curves are in, at least for now." Or when I tried out for sports and didn't make the team, she made sure to announce it loudly to anyone who would listen, adding with that same smirk, "Guess athletics just isn't your thing." Every failure I experienced became her punchline, and every triumph of hers became the standard I was told I should live up to. By the time we were adults, her smirks had evolved into a language of their own. I didn't need her to say a word. One look was enough to tell me exactly what she thought of me. That lifetime of small humiliations built up like layers of stone, heavy and unshakable. Which is why, at that barbecue, her words about the pork ribs didn't come out of nowhere. They were the culmination of years of dismissals and digs, sharpened into one cruel comment. It wasn't just about food. It was about every time she had made me feel less than. And the laughter that followed was just another reminder that no one had ever taken my pain seriously. The thing I remember most about that barbecue wasn't just my sister's words, it was the laughter that followed. Her jab about the pork ribs was sharp, but the sound of everyone else joining in was what truly broke something inside me. It wasn't one or two chuckles. It was a chorus, a wave of noise that made me feel like the entire backyard had turned against me. My uncle slapped the table as if she'd told the best joke of the day. My cousins snorted into their drinks, and even my parents allowed themselves little smiles they tried to hide behind napkins. In that moment, I wasn't their daughter, sister, or niece. I was the punchline. The laughter seemed to last forever, echoing in my ears long after their voices quieted. Each laugh landed like a slap, confirming that what my sister said wasn't just her opinion. It was something the whole family was willing to validate. My cheeks burned, my throat tightened, and for a split second, I considered snapping back, saying something cruel in return just to defend myself. But then I looked around the table and realized it would be useless. No matter what I said, it would only make me seem more sensitive, more dramatic. That was the role I had been cast in, the one they all believed. My silence became my only option. I remember staring down at my plate, suddenly hyper-aware of every bite I had taken, every rib bone stacked neatly on the corner. My appetite vanished, and yet I forced myself to chew and swallow, pretending nothing was wrong. Pretending I hadn't just been humiliated in front of everyone I was supposed to feel safe with. I could hear them moving on to another topic, laughing again about something else, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. I was still sitting in the shadow of that moment, unable to shake it off the way they had. What hurt most wasn't the insult itself, but how easily the others accepted it as entertainment. Their laughter told me that my feelings didn't matter, that my dignity was worth less than a quick joke. If even my parents could smile at my humiliation, then who was ever going to defend me? That realization settled into me like a weight, heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I stayed quiet for the rest of the afternoon. I smiled when someone looked at me. I nodded when I was asked a question, but inside, I was shrinking. My silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. I knew if I showed how much it hurt, they'd only laugh harder, tell me I needed to lighten up, that I was proving my sister right. So I bottled it up, pressing my nails into my palms under the table just to keep myself steady. That day, I learned something painful but undeniable. Laughter can be the sharpest weapon of all. It doesn't leave bruises on the skin, but it carves deep scars into the heart. And sitting in the middle of that backyard, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me, I realized I was bleeding in ways no one else could see. Long before that barbecue, words had already been shaping the way I saw myself. I don't remember the first time someone in my family commented on my body, but I remember the way it made me feel, like I was somehow wrong just for existing as I was. It was never framed as cruelty, of course. They disguised it as concern, as jokes, as harmless teasing. "Do you really need seconds?" my aunt once asked with a laugh when I was a teenager. My father used to call me solid instead of slim, as though that softened the blow. And my sister? She never missed a chance to remind me that I didn't look like her, that I wasn't the one people turned their heads to notice. Over time, those words became more than sounds in the air. They became the mirrors I looked into. Even when no one was around, their voices lived in my head, telling me I wasn't enough. I would stare at my reflection and see not myself, but the version of me they had painted with their smirks and comments. It didn't matter how hard I worked, how kind I was, or what I achieved. All I ever seemed to hear was the echo of their laughter and the label they had written for me. That's why what happened at the barbecue wasn't just one careless remark. It was the culmination of years of being chipped away piece by piece until I barely recognized myself. My sister's jab about the pork ribs carried the weight of every comment I had ever endured. It was as if she had gathered all those years of digs and delivered them in one swift blow. And when the family laughed with her, they confirmed what I had always feared, that they all saw me the same way. What they didn't understand was that words don't just vanish after they're spoken. They plant themselves deep in the soil of a person's mind and grow roots that are difficult to tear out. Every comment about my weight, every laugh at my expense, had become part of how I measured my worth. By the time I reached adulthood, I wasn't just carrying my own insecurities, I was carrying theirs too, stacked on my back like stones. That night, as I replayed the scene over and over in my head, I realized how heavy that weight had become. My sister thought she had made a joke. The rest of the family thought they had shared a laugh. But for me, it was the moment the burden became unbearable. I couldn't keep living like that, trapped by the words of people who were supposed to love me. The sting of that humiliation lit something inside me that I hadn't felt before. Not just pain, but anger. Anger at them, at her, and most of all at myself for letting their voices drown out my own for so long. That barbecue was the final straw, the moment I decided that their words would no longer be the weight that defined me. If they weren't going to respect me, then I would learn to respect myself. And that shift, though born out of cruelty, was the beginning of everything. After that barbecue, I went home with the laughter still echoing in my ears. I replayed every detail in my mind, the way my sister's smirk widened when she saw how her words landed, the way my father chuckled as if it was nothing, the way no one came to my defense. For years, that would have broken me. I would have cried into my pillow, maybe tried to shrink myself, maybe stayed quiet until the sting faded. But that night, something different happened. As I sat in my room, staring at my reflection in the darkened window, I made a decision I didn't tell anyone about. I wasn't going to fight her. I wasn't going to shout or argue or beg anyone to take my side. None of that had ever worked before, and deep down, I knew it never would. What I decided instead was that I was done letting her words define me. I had lived too long under the weight of her smirks, her jokes, and the family's laughter. That night, I chose silence, not the silence of shame, but the silence of resolve. I realized that real change doesn't happen when you try to convince others to see you differently. It happens when you start to see yourself differently. If my sister's cruelty was a mirror, then I had spent my whole life staring into it and believing the reflection was real. But I finally understood that I didn't have to. I could build a new mirror. I could decide who I was, not her, not anyone else. So I started with a promise to myself. No more shrinking. No more hiding. No more swallowing humiliation as if it was my lot in life. Her words might have been the spark, but they didn't have to be my truth. My truth would be the life I built from here on out, piece by piece, even if no one else noticed, especially if no one else noticed. It wasn't an angry fire that burned inside me. It was steadier, calmer, more determined. I didn't need to humiliate her the way she had humiliated me. I didn't need to turn the tables or get even. My revenge, if I even wanted to call it that, would be living in a way that made her words irrelevant. My resolve was to outgrow her cruelty so completely that one day she would see me and realize her power had vanished. That night I went to bed with a strange sense of peace. The pain was still there, of course, but beneath it was something new. Strength. A quiet, unshakable strength that I had never felt before. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for my family to change, for my sister to stop, for someone to step in and defend me. I knew no one would. And that was fine, because I was finally ready to defend myself, not with loud words or dramatic gestures, but with a life built on my own terms. That decision, silent and private as it was, became the turning point of everything that came after. The morning after that barbecue, I woke up with the same heaviness I had carried to bed, but there was also a flicker of something new, resolve. I didn't announce anything to anyone. I didn't make a grand speech about how I was going to change my life. Instead, I started small. I poured myself a glass of water before coffee. I laced up sneakers that had been sitting in the back of my closet and walked around the block. It wasn't much, but it was different, and that difference mattered. The first few weeks were clumsy. I wasn't suddenly running miles or eating perfectly balanced meals. I stumbled, I got tired, I gave in to old habits sometimes. But the difference was that I kept showing up. When my sister's voice crept into my head, mocking me, I walked a little further. When the memory of the family's laughter burned in my chest, I cooked myself a meal that nourished me instead of numbing me. It wasn't about punishment anymore, it was about respect, respecting myself enough to try. The small steps began to build into something bigger. I started journaling at night, pouring out all the words I had swallowed over the years. I didn't realize how much I had been carrying until I saw it on paper, page after page of hurt that I had never spoken aloud. Writing gave me clarity. It reminded me that I wasn't crazy or dramatic. What I had endured had been real, and acknowledging it freed me from some of its weight. I built routines that no one else saw. Early mornings became my secret weapon. While the house was quiet, I moved my body, read, studied things that inspired me. Those hours weren't about looking different for my family or proving anything to my sister. They were about claiming time for myself, about reminding myself that my life mattered enough to prioritize. Each sunrise felt like a fresh start, one no cruel words could take away. Discipline came slowly, and with it, a sense of pride I had never known. There were days I wanted to quit, when progress felt invisible. But then I'd look back a month, 3 months, and realize how far I had come. Clothes fit differently. My energy was brighter. My mind was sharper. But the most powerful change wasn't physical. It was the growing belief that I was capable of shaping my own story. Patience became my constant reminder. Change wasn't going to happen overnight. It wasn't going to be one dramatic transformation that silenced every smirk. It was going to be dozens of tiny decisions, layered over time, that created a person no one could dismiss again. And as those days stacked up, so did my self-respect. For once, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't waiting for applause. Each small step became its own victory, proof that I no longer lived under their definition of me. My transformation wasn't loud, but it was steady. And with every quiet change, I was building a life that their laughter could never touch again. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. There were no announcements, no posts online, no dramatic declarations at family dinners. I had learned the hard way that sharing my goals only gave my sister more ammunition. If I said I was trying something new, she'd smirk, roll her eyes, and wait for me to stumble. And if I slipped up, even once, the whole family would turn it into another joke at my expense. So instead of inviting their ridicule, I chose silence. My journey became mine alone, something they couldn't contaminate with their doubt or laughter. Outwardly, nothing seemed to change. I still showed up at gatherings, still endured my sister's casual comments, still kept my head down when the spotlight turned my way. She probably thought she had won, that her words had buried me deeper into the box she'd always put me in. When she smirked across the table, I didn't argue anymore. I just let her believe what she wanted. What she never realized was that while she was gloating, I was building. Behind closed doors, my life was transforming. I was creating routines that no one knew about. I was choosing better food, moving my body, sharpening my mind, and most of all, reshaping the way I thought about myself. For the first time, my identity wasn't being defined by my sister's insults or my family's laughter. It was being defined by my actions, by the discipline I practiced every day in private. There was something powerful about keeping it to myself. The silence became a shield, protecting my growth until it was strong enough to stand on its own. My sister believed I was still the same person she could mock into silence. She carried herself with that same smugness, not realizing how little power her words had anymore. I didn't need to correct her. I didn't need to tell her she was wrong. Let her think she had broken me. Let her believe she had the upper hand. The truth was, I had stopped living in her world altogether. She was too busy playing games, while I was too busy creating a version of myself that no one could laugh away. And that was the sweetest part. Watching her underestimate me without saying a word. She had no idea that her cruelest joke had planted the seed of my resolve. No idea that every time she smirked at me, I was secretly miles ahead of the person she thought I was. I learned to smile back, not with bitterness, but with the quiet knowledge that I was building something real, something lasting. Silence, I realized, was its own form of power. By keeping my progress private, I robbed her of the chance to diminish it. By not asking for recognition, I made every step forward mine alone. She thought she had won. She thought she had written my story with her laughter. But in reality, I was writing my own, line by line, choice by choice, becoming someone stronger than she could ever imagine. At first, the changes I made showed up in the mirror. My clothes fit differently, my body carried itself with more strength, and I could see the evidence of all the early mornings and late nights of quiet discipline. But over time, I realized the mirror was only showing the smallest part of what was happening. The real transformation wasn't about what anyone could see, it was about how I felt inside, about the way I moved through the world with a steadiness I had never known before. For most of my life, I had let other people's words tell me who I was. My sister's smirks, my family's laughter, their careless comments, they had been the mirrors I measured myself against. And because of that, I had spent years believing I was smaller, weaker, less worthy than I truly was. But as I worked in silence, building new habits and trusting myself more, those false reflections lost their power. I began to see myself not through their eyes, but through my own. Resilience became my foundation. Every setback I had endured, every insult I had swallowed, every time I had stayed quiet when I wanted to scream, it all became fuel. Instead of breaking me, it had taught me how to bend without snapping, how to keep moving even when the world told me I couldn't. That resilience was worth more than any change in my appearance. It meant I could face challenges without fear, knowing I had already survived worse. Confidence followed, not in a loud, boastful way, but in the quiet certainty of knowing who I was. I no longer walked into a room bracing for ridicule. I no longer second-guessed every word I spoke, waiting for someone to laugh at me. Instead, I carried myself differently. My voice was steadier, my presence stronger, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I no longer needed their approval. That shift was invisible to most people, but I could feel it in my bones. For the first time, I felt in control of my own story. My sister's cruel joke had once made me feel powerless, like she could erase my future with a single sentence. But now I understood that the only person who could write my story was me. Their laughter didn't dictate my worth. Their opinions didn't decide my path. Every choice I made, every step, every habit, every moment I chose to keep going, was proof that I had the pen in my own hand. The deeper change was realizing I didn't need revenge to win. I didn't need to show up at the next barbecue flaunting a new body or listing my accomplishments. The victory was already mine because I had finally claimed ownership of myself. Beyond the mirror, beyond appearances, I had found something unshakable: resilience, confidence, and freedom. And no smirk, no joke, no laughter could ever take that away from me again. The first time someone else noticed, it caught me off guard. A coworker stopped me in the hallway and said, "You look different, lighter, somehow. What have you been doing?" I laughed it off, not ready to explain the months of early mornings, the quiet battles, the inner shifts no one had seen. But inside, something bloomed. For so long, I had been invisible, or worse, the subject of ridicule. To have someone notice without mockery, to have their words come from a place of genuine curiosity and respect, it felt like a small victory. Soon it started happening more often. A friend I hadn't seen in a while hugged me tighter than usual and pulled back, scanning me with surprise. "You're glowing," she said, her tone carrying none of the condescension I was used to. Even strangers in passing, the barista at the cafe, a cashier at the store, smiled at me longer, as though I carried a new energy they could sense without knowing the details. They didn't know about the jokes, the smirks, the years of being made small. They just saw the person I was becoming, and they treated her with kindness. Each comment was a reminder that what I was building in silence wasn't just in my imagination. The work was real, the growth undeniable. And yet, at home, nothing changed. At the next family dinner, my sister barely looked at me, except to deliver her usual small digs. My parents asked about work in the same distracted way, already turning their attention back to my sister's stories. To them, I was still the backdrop. The transformation happening inside me was invisible because they weren't looking for it. They had never looked for it. At first, that stung. A part of me had hoped that if I worked hard enough, if I changed enough, they would finally see me differently. But as the weeks went by, I realized it didn't matter. Their blindness wasn't proof that my progress wasn't real. It was proof that their eyes had never been trained to see me for who I was. And that was their loss, not mine. I stopped craving their recognition. I stopped waiting for their approval. Every time a friend noticed, every time a stranger smiled, every time I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and felt pride instead of shame, I reminded myself that their silence didn't erase my growth. The family might have been oblivious, but the world outside of them wasn't. And most importantly, I wasn't. The first glimpse of change didn't come from the family who had laughed at me. It came from everyone else. And in a strange way, that made it more powerful. Their oblivion forced me to root my confidence in myself, not in their acknowledgement. The more they ignored me, the more I understood that I didn't need their validation. I was changing, and the world could see it, even if my own family chose not to. That was enough to keep me moving forward, step by step, toward the life they would one day no longer be able to deny. When the next family barbecue came around, it felt like walking into a test I hadn't studied for, but already knew the answers to. Months had passed since that day, months of discipline, silence, and small victories that had added up to something bigger than I could have imagined. I wasn't just lighter in body, I was lighter in spirit, carrying myself with a calm strength I had never felt before. As I walked up the driveway and heard the familiar chatter of voices, I felt the old nerves rise in me. But this time, they didn't control me. The smell of smoke and grilled meat filled the air, the same way it always did, but I wasn't the same. I stepped into the yard, and almost immediately I noticed the difference in how people looked at me. An aunt gave me a double take before greeting me. A cousin paused mid-conversation, his eyes flickering with recognition that something about me had shifted. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but I could feel it in their glances. They saw me differently, even if they didn't yet understand why. I didn't announce anything. I didn't make a speech about what I had been doing. I simply carried myself with the quiet confidence that comes when you no longer need anyone else's approval to feel whole. When I smiled, it wasn't forced. When I sat down, it wasn't with the heaviness of trying to disappear into my chair. I was present, comfortable in my own skin for the first time in years. My sister, of course, was there. She looked me over quickly when I walked in, and for a brief second, the smirk I had grown so used to faltered. It wasn't gone completely, but it wasn't as strong as before. For the first time, it seemed uncertain. She tried to carry on as usual, cracking little jokes and pulling attention back to herself. But I could sense the shift. The balance of power, the unspoken hierarchy that had always favored her, wasn't so steady anymore. The rest of the family didn't say much, at least not directly. They weren't the kind to acknowledge change out loud, but their body language gave it away. The same uncle who had once slapped the table laughing at my expense now asked me about work. My mother, who usually turned her eyes away when I tried to share, actually listened when I spoke. Even if they didn't know what had changed, they could feel that something had. But the most important part wasn't their reaction. It was mine. Sitting there with a plate of food in my lap, I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself or defend myself. I didn't even feel the need to correct my sister's digs. Her words, once heavy as stone, slid off me like water. I knew who I was now, and no amount of laughter could erase that. That barbecue wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about flaunting progress or demanding recognition. It was about walking back into the same place where I had once been humiliated and realizing that I was no longer the same person who had walked out. I had returned, not to prove them wrong, but to live in the truth that I had already become someone stronger than their words could ever touch. My sister had always been quick with her expressions. That smirk of hers was second nature, always waiting at the corners of her mouth, ready to spring into action the second she saw an opening. For years, it had been her way of reminding me where I stood, beneath her charm, beneath her approval. At every family gathering, I had come to expect it, the smug little twist of her lips whenever she caught sight of me. But that day at the barbecue, when I walked across the yard and she lifted her eyes to meet mine, something was different. The smirk tried to appear, but it faltered halfway. For the first time in as long as I could remember, she didn't look certain. She scanned me the way she always did, waiting to find something she could weaponize, some detail to jab at. But her eyes lingered too long. She noticed the way I carried myself differently, how my shoulders weren't slouched anymore, how I didn't fidget or shrink beneath her gaze. I wasn't playing the old role she had written for me, the one where I absorbed her cruelty and said nothing. My silence now was different. It wasn't submission. It was strength. For years, her smirk had been backed by the safety net of the family's laughter. She didn't just mock me, she rallied them, made them her audience, and they rewarded her with chuckles and nods that reinforced her power. But that afternoon, as she hesitated, I could see she was aware of the shift. She couldn't quite count on the others anymore. Their glances weren't so quick to side with her. Some of them even looked at me with curiosity, with recognition that something had changed. She felt it too, and it rattled her. She tried to recover, of course. She leaned back in her chair, raised her eyebrow, and muttered something about me looking different. But her tone wasn't the same. It wasn't dripping with confidence. It carried a note of uncertainty, like she was testing the waters instead of owning the room. And when I smiled back, not nervously, not bitterly, but calmly, she froze. That was when I knew she understood, even if she'd never admit it. It wasn't about the way I looked. Not really. It was about the energy I carried. The dynamic that had given her so much power over me for years was gone, because I wasn't playing my part in it anymore. I wasn't waiting for her approval or crumbling under her words. I didn't need her to stop smirking. I just needed to stop caring. And the moment I did, her power dissolved. That flicker in her expression, the hesitation, the faltering smirk, was worth more than any comeback I could have delivered. It was silent proof that the balance had shifted. She wasn't the one holding the strings anymore. And for the first time, she knew it. Strength used to be something I thought belonged to other people. To my sister, with her sharp tongue and easy confidence. To my parents, who always seemed so sure of their judgments. To anyone who could stand in a room, speak their mind, and walk away untouched by what others thought. I believed strength meant dominance, the ability to put someone else in their place, the ability to win the argument or command the room. But as I moved through my own quiet transformation, I realized I had been wrong all along. Strength wasn't about overpowering anyone. It wasn't about perfection or pretending to be invincible. True strength was about freedom, the freedom to define myself instead of letting anyone else define me. For so long, my identity had been built out of their words. Every insult, every smirk, every dismissive laugh shaped how I saw myself. I lived inside their version of me, the one who was always too much or not enough. I tried to shrink to fit their standards, to change in ways that would finally earn approval. But that was never strength. That was survival. And survival kept me small. What shifted was understanding that I didn't need to fight them to find my power. I didn't need to prove them wrong or stand at the table announcing all the ways I had changed. Strength was in reclaiming the right to tell my own story. It was in deciding who I was, regardless of their smirks or silence. It was in walking into a room and not asking, "Do they see me differently?" but instead asking, "Do I see myself clearly?" Perfection had no place in it. There were still days I stumbled, still moments when my sister's old words echoed in my mind, still times when the shadows of doubt tried to creep back in. But strength meant not letting those moments define me anymore. It meant catching myself, breathing, and choosing a different response. Choosing compassion for myself instead of cruelty. Choosing patience instead of pressure. Choosing to move forward even if it wasn't flawless. And strength wasn't revenge either. For a while, I thought the sweetest victory would be watching my sister's smirk disappear for good, watching her realize I had become everything she said I couldn't be. But the truth is, my growth was never really about her. The moment I stopped making her the center of my story was the moment I became free. Revenge keeps you tethered to the person who hurt you. Strength is cutting the rope and walking away with your head high, no longer defined by their grip. That's what strength became for me. The freedom to exist as myself without apology, without explanation, without fear of their laughter. The freedom to eat a plate of ribs at a barbecue without flinching, to take up space without guilt, to smile at my reflection without hearing their voices. That was strength, and it was mine. For the first time, it was truly mine. Victory didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or a moment where I finally snapped and told my sister off in front of everyone. It came in the quiet. It came in the way I carried myself when no one was looking, in the choices I made every day to honor myself, instead of the image they tried to pin on me. The truth is, I didn't need to throw her words back at her. I didn't need to replay the insults or remind anyone of how cruel the laughter had been. My life became the answer, louder than anything I could have ever said. There's a certain kind of freedom in realizing you don't need validation from those who tried to tear you down. My sister still smirks sometimes, though it doesn't land the way it used to. The family still laughs at her jokes, but I don't feel the sting anymore. That's the victory, knowing that what once defined me now slides off my back without leaving a mark. I don't have to defend myself against their version of me because I've already outgrown it. Walking into a room, I no longer brace myself for their approval or their ridicule. I walk in with my head high because I know who I am. That quiet confidence, the kind they can't touch, is more satisfying than any revenge could ever be. I don't need to raise my voice to prove my worth. I live it, and every step I take is proof enough. Sometimes I think back to that barbecue and the way I sat there with a plate of ribs, feeling humiliated, feeling like the smallest person in the yard. I don't recognize that version of myself anymore. She was real and she was hurting, but she was also the beginning of me. Her silence became the soil where this strength grew. And though my sister's words sparked the fire, it was my choice that kept it burning. The victory is quiet, yes, but it is also undeniable. It's in the resilience I built when no one was watching. It's in the confidence that doesn't falter under anyone's gaze. It's in the life I've created that no insult can take away. My sister may never apologize. My family may never fully understand the weight of what they laughed at. But that doesn't matter anymore. Their recognition isn't the prize. My freedom is. The quiet victory is this. I don't need to prove myself to anyone. I don't need to erase the past or change their minds. I only need to keep living as the person I've become, stronger, freer, unshakable. That's more than revenge. That's peace. And in the end, peace is the kind of victory that lasts forever. Did you enjoy the story? If so, Please let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe to support us. Thanks for watching.